Happy Sunday, everyone. Happy Sunday evening. Welcome to Reimagine with Renata. I am your host, Renata Del Carmen, and this podcast is your go to space for faith, fashion, and lifestyle inspiration. It's designed to empower you to live boldly, love deeply, and walk confidently into your purpose. So I'm excited to have you all here with me today. As you may remember, 2 episodes ago, we discussed the importance of voting and making an informed decision. And fast forward to today, most of the results are in, and America has spoken. And so I'm excited to jump right back into this conversation. I think it is an important conversation. And I have the honor of having this discussion and the impact of this election with some amazing women. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome my friends, Nasi Alam and Camille Heron.
Oh my son, thank you for having us.
Hello, ladies. You all are just beautiful. I love it. I
You.
love it.
We were
Stylish.
showing up to the Reimagine space. We had to show up.
I love it. Welcome to the party.
Thanks for
First, I just want to thank you, ladies, for being a part of this conversation. This is such a pivotal time for our country. For many of us, there are a lot of thoughts, a lot of emotions, a lot of misunderstandings happening. And so to even be willing to add your voice to this space at a time where things are just uncertain, I truly appreciate you stepping out and in this way. So thank you. Thank you for being here. How are you feeling?
oof. I feel like that's been the word for this whole Caesar is just oof, you know. I'm feeling good. I'm fine. Unmoved. A little bit surprised, but I'm moved. Still processing all of the news and all of the data and all of that, but I'm good.
Right.
Yeah. I'm good. I'm excited. I think it's time we start having some conversations anyway. And
Hmm.
so I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for holding the space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am aligned. I feel both of your perspectives. And before we move any further, I'd like the people to know who is in the room. So, up to you guys to introduce yourself, whoever would like to jump in first.
I'll go first. So hey everyone who's watching. I am I'm currently serving as a pastor and I'm also a student and just a casual observer of all things culture, which includes politics. And so excited for the conversation.
My name
Welcome.
is Nasia. Thank you. Yes, excited to speak to you as well, Camille. This is our first time meeting each other.
Yeah.
My name is Nasia Alam, and I am the co-founder of a social community platform called I Am Perspective, where we discuss everything from race, gender, religion, and various social issues. I am also a judicial delegate, and I am the daughter of the first South Asian elected to office in New York. And so this is something, I am very interested in speaking about. I never thought we would even be here speaking about something like this. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you both again for being here. I think the common thread amongst the three of us, aside from being women, is also that we serve our community in some capacity, some way, shape, or form. We are supporting them throughout their lives. And I think that plays a major part in our stance in this election. And so I just want to ground everyone that is watching in that is that a lot of what we are speaking about, we know it doesn't just impact us, but it impacts our communities, and there will be varying perspectives. And I ask that everyone who is watching, listening, and learning is respectful not only of myself, but of these women and their choice to use their voice to not just empower us here tonight, but their communities. Um, so Nasi, I want to talk really quickly. You mentioned that your father's the first South Asian elected to I'm sorry, what it was his role again? I don't want to get it wrong.
So he was actually, his first position that he was elected to was school board. This is before they eliminated that role, and so he was elected to District 29 for 2 terms, and then he's also run in a few other elections besides that. But yeah.
Okay. So you have a very interesting perspective on politics, not just in New York, but in general. Um, not just from your household, but also like what it means for someone who is not a white man in America, for lack of better terms, right? And so, what would you say in that experience has shaped your perspective on politics in general?
Yeah, so, as we kind of mentioned earlier, we're all women, but we hold other identities as well. And so I am a South Asian, particularly Bangladeshi, Muslim
Mm.
woman. And so there are various identities that definitely impact the way that I view the different issues that are at hand. Um, and then also, having previous experience, even though my father was elected as a Democrat, this was it was a fight. It was not a easy thing. He was not necessarily even always accepted by the Democratic Party, right? And so I definitely have some feelings about that, and some past experience around what that looks like. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Camille,
Yes.
as a pastor, and
Uh,
we'll talk more about this in terms of the role that the church plays in not just this election, but in politics in general.
mm,
As a pastor, uh, what, if any, do you feel is your responsibility to supporting your community around understanding politics, if at all, if that is a thing?
no, and I like the way you worded the question, right? Because there are varying views around that. And so for me personally, I view my role in the pulpit as just sharing the word of God. What that looks like is, for instance, today, as I'm sure with pastors and faith leaders all across the country, is figuring out how does the text that you're teaching from apply to where people are currently, what they're processing in their lives currently, and for me, it is employing the discipline to remove my emotion and my perspective from what is in the text, right? And so not bending it to fit how I feel or how I think everybody else is feeling. And so in doing that, however, my primary role is to always teach people the heart of Christ and the way of Christ. And hopefully that shapes their value system and then that informs how they vote. But I'm in my role, don't tell people how to vote. Thin line to walk, but yeah.
It is a thin line to walk, and we've seen a lot during this election, which we may or may not may or may not get into. So let's jump into the matter at hand. I would like to start actually with the 2016 election because I think that is where the trajectory of politics shifted the most, is in the run with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, um, and the long lasting effects of that we are experiencing today. Um, as women who have worked with the community and reflecting on 2016's election, what shifts, if any, do you think happened with our nation, with our mindsets at all in ourselves or within our communities.
I
Yeah,
just
so
before
go
she
ahead.
answers, I just really quickly I want to interject on in that because I probably would want to push back and say I think the shift happened 2008 and
Oh,
2012.
oh,
No, I think 2016 only happened the way it did because of 2008 and 2012. Okay, go Nasi.
Oh no, no, that's a great point to make.
and as
Um,
someone who campaigned in 2008 in Pennsylvania, the current state that is currently in turmoil over this election, I would have to say that's a valid point. Nasi?
yeah, for sure.
Mm,
I think what happened really in 2016, or maybe starting off in 2008, is one, it obviously stirred a lot of emotions in people, whether good, bad, something in between. And my personal, I think, that we used to live in a society that you had to be politically correct all the time. And I think one of the biggest things that shifted is that all of a sudden we started talking about politics in a very open and public way that we were not doing before. It was certain things you just did not talk about, right? And so we started to get a little bit more politically incorrect, or whatever, compared to the standards. I think also, specifically for 2016 and the results, I know for it personally impacted me. While I did have a bit of a fear going into it, knowing what the results were going to be, I don't think a lot of people did. I think a lot of people just didn't take politics seriously enough. And when they saw what the results were, I think it was a shock. Like, oh, something like this can happen, and it woke something up.
Yeah. So this is interesting to me, to hear your perspective on that, as also someone who grew up with a parent in politics, because in my household, like, politics was a dinner table conversation. Like, our family gathered, and not with the purpose of speaking about politics, but if we were all in a room, the conversation was happening. So I started to learn the perspectives, not just of my family, but of America from those conversations that my family was having. And I was actually glad that politics became a conversation that people were having publicly. And to that point about it becoming a public conversation, what role do you think, like, social media played in that becoming a public conversation? Because there is that major piece that
yeah.
shifted from 2008 to 2016 was how freely people express themselves
Mhm.
online.
Yeah. I definitely think that really from 2008, especially in the onset of the Tea Party and the birther movement, I think it really gave people permission to go for the jugular without any kind of concern,
From
right?
a private account.
Private or public, right? It was my space, my opinion. I can say what I want to say, and so people had less concern for how their words would affect others, and wanted to stand on their truth, which interesting how many people get to have truths, or how many various truths there are. But I think that certainly started to happen. And so from that point on, social media, just as in real life, is a space where people go for belonging, go for identity, and for finding their group, right? Finding their community. And I think that as people started to feel more emboldened in sharing their personal political opinions online, then they started to find their community. And in that, created echo chambers that kept on getting taller and taller. And now we have what we have, just these very clear lines of division, um, which is very interesting to watch because full disclosure, I'm no party affiliation. Since I moved to this country, I've always been that way because I just feel like nobody gets to own my vote. Um, but it's really interesting from from this perspective to watch people be in their echo chambers to the point that I think social media has now removed for a lot of people the ability to reason.
Mm,
Yeah. To actually jump on what Camille just said, right? I come from the world of perspective, and I recognize that everyone has one. And I think when people started hearing, your voice, your vote, right? It started allowing people to have a voice, specifically on such a open platform, right? I think year by year it becomes even more like we allow ourselves to be seen even more. We share more, say more, and we don't always think about the impact of our words.
mm,
Um, people share without considering, they don't necessarily always have self awareness. Maybe even if they do, they don't care. Right?
Mm.
That's something too. They just don't care. Um, a lot of people have biases. A lot of people have misunderstandings of what the world is and how the world is. And social media gave them a space to one open up and then also find people who think like them. And once you find someone that's find a group that's kind of like you, kind of feed on each other, and it goes like you said, like it turns into a whole other thing. Right? So yeah.
yeah. And with that, and thinking about 2016 and the Trump era, when we were introduced to Trump, the politician, his public dialogue around everything that was important to not just his base, but I think all Americans, right? Especially when you're running for president, I don't know that it was very politically correct. I think his way of speaking to his base and speaking about his opponent at the time, Hillary Clinton, just gave people permission to be not nice. And I think that him becoming the leader of the free world just continued to ignite that. Was it just me? I felt like people became emboldened.
But you know what I just thought of though? Because remember, he's also coming from, business and real estate, but he's coming from reality TV. And reality TV running in parallel to social media gave us permission, honestly, to go for whatever, say whatever, go for the juggler when we're dealing with each other. Because in reality TV, the more contentious people can be, the the more they struggle with the ability to properly resolve conflict, the more money they make, right? And so, what it proved to TV execs and what it proved to a person like Trump is that, or Mr. Trump, let me be respectful to Mr. Trump, is that people, the general public, they like nasty talk.
They
And
like
that's
it.
something we've got to like deal with, right? As a society, it's that we actually do like that kind of stuff. And it's crazy. So I remember growing up back home, whenever I heard of a fight, like I'm running away from the fight. Whereas now, when people hear a fight, they're running to go see it. They're
With
showing up with
cameras
their
out.
cameras. So like he recognized that and fed the society that, and people ate it up and continue to eat it up, which is
Yeah,
just
I think there's a point of authenticity. um I don't always, I don't know if we always want to give him credit, but I think he opened it up for everybody, right? He gave permission to everybody to open up and say what they really mean and what they really feel, whether or not it were things that we wanted to hear or not. Um, but even for myself, I never really thought about how much I needed to speak and share. Like, as I'm hearing other people sharing, I'm like, well, I have some stuff to say too. And so, um, even with I Am Perspective. It was as almost of a result of the elections, right? We started the year after. Um, and there was permission given to everybody, was whether it was in, addition to social media. I definitely watched The Apprentice, you know, um,
Mhm.
and yeah, he understood media very, very well, and he played very well into it. So
Yeah, and I don't want to say that we can sum up his presidency and he was trash talking the entire time and America ate it up. There was a lot that happened during his presidency. Um, but I do want to make sure we get to all of what we want to talk about today. And
mhm.
so I want to talk about what Biden inherited at the end of Donald Trump's presidency. So, what I understand is that he was made aware of the potential threat of the pandemic, didn't necessarily take the precautions that were necessary at the time, in addition to dismantling the World Health Organization that would have supported preventing a pandemic. But nonetheless, he ended his presidency in a pandemic. And would you or would you not agree that at that time people were ready for something new
I would
in
say
terms of
I don't know necessarily that everyone was ready for something new from a president. Um, and I think that the numbers stand to show that, right?
a
It wasn't it wasn't this overwhelming landslide of an election in 2020. I
Mhm,
think that people were certainly looking for someone to hold responsible for what was happening to them in that moment. And we see the
mhm,
same thing even with this election. It's that people are looking for somebody to hold responsible. Um, and it's so interesting because even today I was sharing that at church. It's like somehow people have forgotten that it was a global pandemic. It wasn't just an American thing, right? It didn't affect only the American economy. It didn't only affect American lives. It affected everyone. And because the world is so, because of globalization and the fact that we're so woven together, then anything that affects one affects all. Um, and so I think at the end of his presidency, what Biden inherited from Trump was something that I don't think any person, Trump or Biden, could have even properly fathomed or planned for, right? Is to be fair, someone saying, hey, there may be a pandemic, we haven't had a global pandemic for ever. So you can't fully capture in your mind, I imagine, what that's going to take to manage and to lead through. And so giving grace for that, certainly there was a whole lot of missteps, a lot of lives lost because of the missteps. Some of those missteps was simply out of pride, in my opinion, and not for care for the masses. Some things were done to prove points, and we end up proving points with people's lives rather than just being humble in our leadership. Um,
mhm,
so certainly, I think Biden came in and he had a lot to deal with, not only because of the pandemic, but also, truth be told, because of a lot of the things that were dismantled simply because of the president who came before him and wanting to undo and wipe clean the memory of all the things that a previous president, President Obama, put in place. And so that certainly left a whole lot to come in and deal with and juggle.
mhm,
Yeah, I think all the things. I don't think it's a single issue. Um, it really ever is. And so the pandemic and how he may or may not have handled it, and like you said, Camille, like nobody knew really what that really meant at that time. Um, but obviously, he made decisions that did impact our economy. It impacted immigration. It impacted just how we were dealing with each other. And I think what happens is, you always There are some people who wanted him to stay for a second term for sure, obviously.
Mhm.
But then there were also, as happens every 4 years, is you blame the current administration for everything and you want change. And so there's only really one other option to go. And so, um, Biden came in during an interesting time. We were just starting to really open back up. Um, and, he had to deal with what happened in the past. And, all presidents do, right? And so, you know, he kind of knew what he was getting himself into. He's been working for this. This is, so he
Right.
signed up for the job, and you know, the job was the job. And we can talk about maybe what that looked like for him as he was handling the job. He promised a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? And so,
And with that, him promising a lot of things, I think one major shift I saw in his um, campaign early on was his um, adding Kamala Harris to his campaign as his vice president. Uh, and I have thoughts, and people are going to say that I'm biased because they know I'm Team Kamala. So, were your thoughts about him selecting Kamala Harris as a vice president?
it was a good decision
Could it
at the
like
time.
did it make you want to did it make you feel like more secure about where we were headed as a country? Did it make you feel like, oh, I don't know? And I asked this question, let me give you context because I my first election was that I was able to vote was 2000, year 2000, when Al Gore was telling you all about the climate change that you're experiencing right now. But anyway,
Mhm.
that was the first election that I was able to vote in. And so since that election, the only vice president to not become president since that election is Mike Pence.
I didn't even think
Every
of
other
that.
vice every other vice president
Has run a
that
presidential election. You're right.
including Joe Biden.
Yeah, you're right.
So when he accepted Kamala Harris as his vice president, my mind automatically projected that she would be president at some point, whether it be in 2024 or 2028,
Yeah.
right? So
You know,
that is
my experience has not been like you just mentioned Al Gore, right? And he did not win.
right.
And so, um, in a span of 24 years, maybe that has been the trend. Has that always been the trend? And I don't know the full stats, right? But um, I don't know if they've always become the president. But of course, there's always that likelihood that it's the vice president that's going to at least run, whether they win or not. I don't know if the Democratic Party was thinking long term. They
Mm,
kind of make a lot of decisions at the
Reactive.
moment for the moment, right? And
Yeah.
she was a good choice. She was, if not for anything, the first woman vice president, the first one, you know, um, and she was black and she was South Asian and she fit a lot of roles that worked for him, right? Going from a black man president to now Biden, right?
yeah.
And he knew that he needed to bring in something that was different from who he was. And so it was a good move, but I don't think the Democrats were thinking, what are we going to do? Right? Because 8 years from now, right? Because the
Mhm.
expectation was that he was going to be in there for 2 terms.
Mhm.
And age is something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
Um, but that was definitely something to consider as well of like, how many terms can this man do this for? Right?
It's
Yeah.
funny because when the announcement was made, I didn't even think about Kamala eventually being or running for president. I was just impressed with the choice, and I'm always impressed with the choice when a presidential candidate can choose someone that was one of their loudest critics on the debate stage.
Mm,
When you and
mm,
I just battled it out in primary debates, and yet still I can turn around and see the value in what you bring, and
mm,
we can then pledge to work for it. And I think there's a lot to be said about that in terms of the leadership and what it teaches us in terms of just learning how to argue, but
mhm.
without robbing someone of their dignity or their value, right?
Yeah.
Being able to work together. Um,
Um, I agree. And one thing that I have to say regarding Kamala is that she is respected by both parties, by many people in both parties, which I don't think is easy to do at all. So I thought that was impressive. But given that you mentioned that and the potential impact of her running for president and what that means for our country, when not skipping over the work Biden has done, but when he decided that he would no longer run for president in 2024 and decided that he would nominate Kamala for the role. How did you feel? Nussie knows how I felt. Nussie and I were in the same room, but how did you all feel about that?
I think Camille just said it a little bit earlier. It was a great leadership move for him, right? Because in history, as far as I know, that has not happened. There has not been, a sitting president who decides in the middle of a election season that he's willing to give up his seat, right? And whatever the methods were that they somehow convinced him or whatever that was, he still did it and he didn't have to, right? And so he had enough faith in her and he understood um, the direction things were going, and he made that decision. And for us to even have this opportunity, I don't believe if he had decided not to run way back, right, like during when other people were running, right, like he wouldn't this wouldn't have happened. I don't think she would have had the chance to run for president if this was a big race, right, in the primaries. So
Yeah, and I so in thinking about her now taking the baton to run in this election and the issues that she spoke a lot about that to the public became her most pressing concerns in this campaign, particularly around reproductive rights, women's reproductive rights. Do you feel that that was her separating herself from Biden? A lot of people talk about how she would step out on her own and what issues and policies she would create for herself. I don't necessarily know if you all know. You can surely speak on it, but I don't know of Biden ever taking a firm stance on reproductive rights.
yeah, it's one of those policies that he's tentative on, and that's really informed by his faith, right? Because he's Catholic, and so for Catholics, it's one of those things that they don't really negotiate on. If I remember well, and I could be wrong, but if I remember well, when he first came into office in 2021, that there were some people who appealed to his archdiocese about his stance, and there were actual priests who were essentially threatening for him to be, I don't know what the term would be in the Catholic faith, but um, in our faith, we would say set down or put on the back bench,
Mhm.
because of his stance with abortion and reproductive rights. I think Well, for one, because of that, then she was certainly the mouthpiece for it, um, prior to even coming into 2024, right? She was already going out and championing it, especially in the wake of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Um, and Nussie said it earlier, and this has always been one of my observations is that the Republican Party is much better at playing a long game than the
Mm,
Democratic Party. Democratic Party tends to be very reactive. And so I don't know that they even had a game plan coming
mm,
into this election season. I don't think they've had a game plan, actually, quite honestly, for probably close to 20 years now. Um, Even in terms of Joe Biden's campaign in 2020, it was, I'm not Trump.
yeah.
A lot of it was, I'm not Trump, right? And so, um, and for this year, they got into July and they realized that that was just not strong enough. And so then the party then needed to come up with another solution. And I think it's unfortunate that he is going to take the fall for that because the reality is that the entire party did not have other solutions. They don't have a roster of people that are prepared and ready to run in this race. The very reason why he even entered the race for 2020 was because he looked at the lineup and decided none of these people have a strong chance at beating Trump.
Mm,
So I think because of that, then they overplayed the issue
mm,
and they grossly underestimated um, the fact that that issue, while it is important to a large group of women, it is still an issue that people struggle with, whether it be because of their faith or because of their culture.
right.
And so, because even like for in the Jamaican culture, abortion is something that they sing about in songs in a very derogatory way.
Mm-hmm.
So whether they're a person of faith or not, it's no. That I can't even repeat what they call women who they think have had abortions, and so I think the party absolutely overplayed that issue in thinking that enough people cared about it that they will stand 10 toes down and vote on it. And therefore, and also giving grace for the fact that her campaign was 105 days long, then they're really building her platform as they go.
Yeah.
Yeah, building their platform as you go. Um, you were gonna say something, Renata? I didn't want to.
No, I was actually going to ask you in conjunction with what she chose to run on, the policy she chose to focus on, and what a lot of people say was her effort to separate herself from Biden. Do you think that not addressing the foreign policies and issues of Israel and Gaza and instead focusing on reproductive rights either hurt her campaign or severely impacted it?
Yeah, I think there were quite a few issues that impacted her campaign, and when you focus in on just one, um, which came naturally, I think, as a woman president coming in, um, of course, that seems like the one to go for. And it definitely is something to consider and think about. And it definitely impacted a lot of votes. But there were a lot of issues. It was the economy, right? There are a lot of people who specifically voted for Trump, even though they're blue leaning, because of the economy, right? Immigration, right? Illegal immigration has been a huge topic for many people, and that was not addressed in her campaign. And of course, Gaza being a very big issue in itself. Um, and not that I don't know if, as someone who comes from a Muslim background, I think we kind of had this idea that no matter who's in power, whether it's Trump or Harris, the US has always traditionally stood with Israel. But there was a lack of acknowledgement that this is happening. And there have been, and I've shared this with you, Renata, in the past, of like questions, like, people, when she was questioned and she didn't have a firm stance, or she said things that were not in alignment with the people that she was speaking with. And I think the Democratic Party really just did not understand how much that was going to play into the results. Right.
Yeah.
So,
And it's interesting you raised that point, Nessie, because I think both for the issue of Israel and Gaza, as with so many, the issue of immigration, one of the things that I think Joe Biden in his prime was great at, and not many people in the Democratic Party are great at that, is being able to respond quickly, right, without needing to filter through all of the things. And so when if a Republican person would say to him, "Hey, but what about Israel?" I can imagine Joe Biden in his prime being able to say, "Yeah, what about Israel? Because you and I are doing the same thing." Right?
yeah.
Or what about immigration? Oh, I don't know. You've had, when you're in power, you also had an immigration issue. I mean, kids were being put in cages under Republican watch, not under the Democratic watch. And so I think that the Democratic Party certainly, um, I don't want to say play nice because it's good to play nice, but I think they were very slow in helping the public to not lose sight of the fact that in a lot of ways, both parties, both sets of administrations have had similar issues and haven't really varied a lot in how they're dealing with some of these issues,
Yeah.
truth be told.
Now, I have thoughts about that. I agree that the Democratic Party is often slow to respond. Um, but when I compare it to how the Republican Party has addressed issues, I feel like the people who are front and center, whether it be Donald Trump, JD Vance, or someone else, like they're more like loose cannons, and then the Republicans just clean it up after, as opposed to them having a strategic response to critical issues that impact us.
Hmm.
Um,
I
and
agree.
in some of the, I guess, well, we are here. We are at the 2024 election.
We here.
We're here now. Harris is running. Uh, she has selected Tim Walz. Donald
Mhm.
Trump has selected JD Vance. The people are discussing everything from reproductive rights to Project 2025. But what stood out to me in terms of the Republican Party, and I realized the amount of digital illiteracy that exists within our communities. People do not know whether they are watching something that is real and correct because it's potentially AI generated, it's been edited. They're hearing it from someone who is not hearing it from a reputable source, reputable information. You have to pay for now, whether it is a New York Times subscription, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, whatever it is, people are not paying for it, right? They're taking the free stuff that floats around social media, the internet. And that became a big thing in past elections about cybersecurity, cyber crimes, infiltrating with, and it's still an issue today.
Still very much.
But there's a very prominent group who plays a role in this election. Actually, there are a few, and they are white evangelicals and MAGA country. I call them MAGA country. What role do you feel like they may or may not have played in shaping the narratives in this current election, given the policies that were being pushed, like reproductive rights and immigration and the economy?
I mean, I think it definitely supported in confirmation bias. right? And confirming some of the things that they already thought. The videos or whatever they were making, it was geared towards specific voters, right? I don't know if it was influencing that many new people. Like, I wasn't going to turn someone who thought very differently around, right? But I think it confirmed things for certain people, right? Whether they were already kind of thinking it or not. Like, it was like, oh yeah, no, I'm right in what I'm thinking, right? Like, I see something and it proves my point. Um, and and so I think that definitely impacted it. I think authenticity is something. Um, you kind of mentioned something earlier, authenticity, and you had mentioned that Republicans were more reactive, right, in terms of cleaning things up. But before they clean things up, people always have this original sound bites. Before you can edit things, there's someone's gonna have that sound bite,
Mhm.
right? You can't really fully clean it up. And in those authentic moments, whether or not it was hard to hear for some of us, they were being real, right? And I think some of the things with Democrats, like Camila, you mentioned Biden and his experience, and really what I was thinking about is like he's been doing this for 50 years.
Yep,
He has, for him, running for president has been a lifelong goal,
yep,
right? And so he's been in practice for a very long time. And
mhm,
I don't know if Kamala has always had that national space to practice of
Mm,
how to answer and whatever, right? But that itself is also something people have their feelings and about politicians,
yeah.
right? And them not being authentic. And so whenever you answer in a way that comes off as not being authentic, people can now take this footage and turn it into something completely different. And so I think that, with the authenticity and then the AI, and then, yeah, there's a lot of different factors.
There's something you said at the beginning, Nessie, that my experience has been a little bit different in that I do think they were very successful in convincing people to think differently than they would have before, right? And so, for instance, one of the pain points, and I've never said this publicly, one of my pain points in watching this past election cycle is scrolling on my timelines and seeing Black people question Kamala's Blackness. And I would see people say, she's not Black, her father is Jamaican. I'm sorry, I'm Jamaican, and I don't care how you rub this skin. Okay? So that for me was such a sore point. I just kept scrolling. It was a lot of scrolling and unfollowing and hiding people because I'm just not in the place quite yet to engage with that level of ignorance. And I've got no other term for it but ignorance. Um, but what it said to me, what it proved to me, is that in the long game that the Republican Party was playing, they were very strategic in some ways that subconscious messaging had been happening for quite some time,
mhm,
in such a way that persons were very convinced that this is their original thought and that this is them having reasoned through and weighed all of the facts around, and they are at this greater level of enlightenment and understanding than the rest. And I think the numbers would want to show that, as much as a lot of people are trying to say, oh no, the Black men and the Black women showed up. Like, no, if you look closely at the numbers, he kind of chipped away at the Black male vote. And a lot of that, outside of her gender, was also because they chipped away at some of the people who were pro Black who didn't see her as Black enough or
mhm.
Black at all. And so I think they were very successful in changing some people's minds in ways that the people didn't even recognize it. Um, but and it is on both sides, right? Like Kamala's campaign.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. And even how they, as you were just sharing that, like when they show you social media and what shows up on your feed is very, they pick and choose who sees what, right? And so they were definitely what you may have had on your feed versus what Renata had and what I had might have been very different. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that both parties were really good at utilizing social media. I mean, whoever was running the Kamala HQ accounts,
Working hard for that money, weren't they?
to me, that was the account that would say all the things that Kamala Harris can't say, right? And so they certainly used social media and to great extent AI to help in this campaigning. And I really agree with you, Renata, that it has produced not just digital, what did you call it? Digital ignorance,
Illiteracy.
illiteracy. Not only that, but like honestly, people are struggling with some measure of just their cognitive ability outside of the digital space. And so that's led to even what the conversations are offline about politics. And whoever plays it best is the one who wins,
Yeah.
honestly.
So there is a conversation brewing, and I don't want anyone to hold this as like fact yet because it's just something I've seen sprung up in the media, but there's this conversation brewing around the costs in this election and where money was spent by both parties. And what
Mhm.
I do know is in like mid October, mid to end of October, we saw data stating that the Democrats had spent upwards of $182 million on ads, social media ads, while Republicans had only spent 48 million. And it's clear, right? Kamala was everywhere online. And as someone who volunteered with the Democratic National Committee, I can tell you that they were pumping out content to us in large numbers. Like daily, we had video clips, we had graphics, we had like so much content for every candidate, for Kamala and for Trump, um, and Tim Walls, and just like there was so much content that was being created for us to pump out to social media, and that's just what they were giving volunteers. That's not even what they were doing on their own, right? On social media. And in looking at the results of the election, I read somewhere, I remember the source in a moment, but it stated that a lot of Trump's base, they were reach. He said earned media today, but they were on television, right, or like mailers is how he reached his base. And so I am thinking that the surge of ads that the Democrats used on social media was in an effort to reach Gen Z who were in an uproar around Israel and Gaza. And Nessie, do you think, or either one of you actually, do you think that is why they were targeting social media, Gen Z, or some argue that they were trying to combat potential ads that were happening from the Republicans or
I mean,
cybercrime?
I think, yeah, I think the Harris campaign was definitely younger. And so, um, even in the ways of, I think, using social media, right? They had, people who were able to use new methods, right, and reach the younger population. I think part of it is not just numbers of what the Democratic and Republican Party was spending, but I don't, I haven't watched regular TV in a really long time and I skip a lot of ads, but I recall growing up, um, you would have commercials that were endorsed by private people. And
And
so,
they
for
still,
whatever money the Trump campaign was not
yeah.
using, I believe there were definitely a lot of private people who were creating and spending their own money and creating all sorts of ads and billboards. And so, those numbers, you don't know what those numbers are, right? Just because his campaign reported something and then whatever else his supporters, and he has a lot of very rich supporters.
Right.
I mean, we see who he's rolling with, so
With the
Who
big
was
dogs.
speaking? people was paying people paying.
A
A
million,
million dollars, right?
the sign.
So
Okay.
so so valid. I'm glad. I don't want to be the one say is the people say she's biased, she's a Kamala girl, so she's gonna say whatever against Donnie and the gang. Listen, and I want to make this clear to my audience. I have no animosity towards Trump. I think he is a master enroller. He has been able to enroll majority of this country into believing that he, as a man who is married to an immigrant, with a vice president that is married to an immigrant, is going to set a policy in place to ensure that immigrants are not infiltrating the country in the way that he's described it, and that somehow they're going to be adjacent in riches to him. He's enrolled majority of the country into believing that that is what he's going to do for them. He's going to fix the economy, and he may, but I still am just flabbergasted that he is able to get that many people into believing that that is his true intention.
When you said the word master, the word that came to me is master intimidator, right? Because one of the ways that I have genuinely been just, I wish I could study it, is the way in which the entire party,
Folded.
in 2016, I went into the booth, and I don't want to sound dramatic because I want to be one of those people. But 2016, I went in the booth and I remember looking at my ballot, wondering because being an NPA here in Florida, then when it's time for the primaries, of course, I'm not voting in either of those primaries on their presidential candidates. I'm just voting during the primaries on other issues, right? Local elections and whatever other local issues. So I remember when it came to the general election, and I look at the ballot, and I stood in that booth for so long because I could not understand how is it they started with what 16? Was it 16 candidates that the Republican Party had in 2016? Where they had Jeb Bush. Whatever happened to Jeb? Right? Like Marco Rubio started with all these people, Ben Carson and all these people. And somehow the party ended up with Donald J. Trump. I was so I I just couldn't really. And then I look at what happened in this cycle, where he didn't show up to debate the entire primary season. He held a town hall on the night of each of their debates. He called them all kinds of names, and then they all showed up at the convention and said, "Come on, let's all rally around and let's get it going," including his vice president elect, who has made as sharp a 180 turn as any I've ever seen, right? Um,
Gone. He's just gone.
I mean, we could call it all kinds of things, but he's gifted. If nothing else, Mr. Trump is gifted where that area is concerned because he has somehow managed to come into the scene, first of all, entering into politics by questioning the birthplace of Obama, and then risen to not only lead the party, but the party is now his party.
His,
It
all
is
his.
now his party. I think in light of other issues that have come about recently, right? Uh he is a master intimidator. He knows things about everybody. Like, like if you really want to get into it, he's been collecting information. And
Mhm.
so he knows how to intimidate you, right? We don't know those back conversations that he's having and why, now they're coming in and they're going so hard for him, considering what he was saying. But I think he is the master of that. I had just shared some articles with Renata earlier, and he already had a phone call with Mayor Adams, right? And Mayor Adams is um, planning on stopping asylum, right? Like whatever conversation they had, shifts were made, and
That's
he's
why the
also.
vouchers are ending.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
That's why the food vouchers are ending.
Mhm.
Oh,
Um,
Mm-hmm. The food voucher. Yeah.
yeah.
ah,
What you gonna say,
Um,
Renata? Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say to that point that I find it interesting in regards to um, thinking back to when Eric Adams declared New York as a sanctuary state. The understanding that I had was that he was anticipating the support from the federal government, and and I don't know if that ever happened, but at the time it didn't happen, and there were some frustrations around that. But it is clear, and we are clear based on what um, Donald Trump has said, is that he's not supporting it. So, I mean, he had to do what he had to do before Trump got where he's going, right? So that he can ensure
And
funding
he's
from
in
the
some legal
federal
troubles himself, right? And so.
government, right? Because his April. So, I
Yeah.
and with that, we've talked about the policy, the campaign Kamala run. It was reproductive rights, the media ads, the money that was spent there. But there is also one key piece, and I'll pose this question to you, Camille, in regards to what did or did not impact Kamala's campaign was the role of the Black church.
mm,
And so many articles, pastors, and people have said that the Black church plays an instrumental role in galvanizing and energizing and
mm,
getting the grassroots organizations in order to support Democratic candidates, and given the effects of 2020
mm,
and the current state of the church, that wasn't easy or even possible in some states based on church membership and attendees. Do you feel the impact of that? Does that resonate? Is
mm,
it not something that has ever been present? Is I'm not. I've only been a member of one church. Not that I've been a member of a ton of churches, but my family is divided in their worship, so I've attended different churches because of that. But um, there's only one church that I could think of that didn't have a politician in the pulpit at some point.
mm. So for me personally, my practices, I've never invited any into the pulpit. Now, I've also only been pastoring for 3 years. But yeah, I don't think that I ever will. That being said, though, there certainly has been, and it's not unique to the Black church, there is a decline in church attendance, right? And certainly it has sped up post pandemic, but it was happening before that. For the
Mhm.
Black church, though, I think there has it's interesting because I was in a conversation this week, and specifically them asking about Black church and me distinguishing that there are different types of Black church, right? There's like the historical Black church, and then there are the Black churches that are not necessarily Black American churches, multi ethnic, with all kinds of Black people from the Caribbean and such. And because of that, and because of I think a lot of my peers, of millennials and Gen Z pastors, they don't necessarily see their role as a pastor or see the church's role as being a voice in politics. Um,
Mm,
they see themselves as being answers to social issues in terms of going and doing, but not so much in terms of giving voice to various political topics.
mhm,
I think for this campaign in particular, we have to always remember it was only 100 days,
mm,
105 days. So there's only so many places that she can get to in those 105 days. Um, and so couldn't do the usual running around church to church, but then also you get there, and because a lot of churches don't have a very strong attendance for with Gen Zs, there are those that do. So I'm not saying that all churches don't, but a large majority of churches, historic or black churches, don't have a strong attendance with Gen Zs. Don't have a strong attendance for millennials. Really, the attendance started falling off with Gen X, truth be told.
Mm,
And so, using the church as a place to reach the masses with one unifying message and rallying them around an issue or a candidate, not necessarily as strong. And I think a part of that is also undermined because of social media, because a lot of times pastors mishandle their platform. And so the distrust for church and for church pastors keeps on growing. So their voice or their opinion on the thing don't really move people as
mm,
much when it comes on to issues such as these. And then also because you're countering with the white evangelical church who stands much stronger, much louder on, for instance, pro life issues, then it causes a lot of our younger people to be stuck in trying to figure out, well, what exactly is the right way?
yeah.
And who's
No,
compromising and who's not compromising,
yeah.
right? And so because of that, then that also contributed to some of the drop off. But it's also interesting because one of the articles that you shared with me, the counter side of it is that in a lot of our white churches since 2015, they've had this mass exodus of younger people who are deconstructing their faith because they're trying to grapple with this church supporting a candidate such as Donald Trump. And so it's been interesting to see how that potentially plays out. But then I don't know that the statistics from this election has gotten to the level where we're able to look not only at how they voted per religion or by gender, but by gender and religion at the same time, right? And gender, religion, and generation, right? Because I think that's where we will find the real answer. But by and large, I don't think that the voice of the Black church is as strong or as influential politically as it used to be.
Yeah. That's major. That and a great impact on the Democratic Party. Um, Nasi, I because Camille brought up gender, this has come to my mind in this moment is the way in which you support men in our community and how you have taken the time to just cultivate them and create a space where they can feel like they are can be vulnerable and express themselves. Um, do you have any insight from men in your community or circle of influence on what this election means for them moving forward? Maybe not so much what they were hoping for, but based on where we are now, what it means for them.
I think in my experience and a few conversations that I've had is that there's this general consensus that they feel that they're not necessarily heard
Mm,
or valued. And, you know, sometimes, especially some of the messaging, it has not necessarily, maybe has, they've already felt like it was against them and there wasn't really much that they could say in the space, whether positive or negative. And so, people, whether they're men, women, they're going to always gravitate to spaces where they feel that they can be or they can share and they can be open. And so I think there's definitely some conversations that need to be had going forward in different communities. Um, and I don't think, I think different men have different perspectives. And, I don't want to speak, I'm not a man, so I cannot speak on behalf of them. but I don't think any man can. I don't think any man can speak on behalf of all men either. And so, they have their different reasonings, but I think from what I gather, a lot of it is just not feeling heard, or not feeling valued enough to be able to speak or share whatever it was that they had going on.
I can see that. I've read about it in articles. I've experienced it in conversation with men, and we're here, right? Um, President-elect Donald Trump is in conversations. If you ask me, I feel like Elon is his vice president. But if you have a different perspective, I'm open to it. Um, but President elect Donald Trump and JD Vance are on their way to the White House. And a lot of people are feeling a lot of ways, considering a lot of what we call rhetoric, but perhaps to be intention for Donald and JD. Um, Kamala, I can't even imagine or experience of what her experience is like right now. I mean, to be the most qualified candidate, but now potentially unemployed is insane in my mind. And I'm working through my thoughts around what that not only means for my experience with the community in terms of the supports they will need as someone who works in education, especially in communities that are populated with migrants.
Mm.
Um, and having this experience from 2016 where children were concerned about their family members being deported and ICE and all the things that happened during the previous Trump presidency, I can only imagine what that will look like now. And so I myself am like ready to just rest, right? And kind of like prepare for the unknown because we really don't know what to expect. A lot of people are anticipating a lot of different things. What is your experience right now and for yourself in general?
Um, so for me, it's quite layered. Um, Ultimately, I'm at peace, and I think we'll always be at peace. My faith will keep me at peace. Um, my faith teaches that we come to a point in time where we're looking towards the end of times, and with that comes all kinds of troubles.
Mm,
But because I know the ultimate end of all things, then I'm at peace. That being said, where I'm also is just really heartbroken by the state of our society and the truth of us that has allowed things to get to where they currently are. Um, I mentioned when I introduced myself, I'm a student, and what I'm currently doing, I'm studying something quite weird. I'm studying kindness and looking at, um, and I ended up there because I simply was just looking at the conversations that were happening and looking at the way that people are living their lives solely for themselves
mhm,
and was very bothered by it, especially within the Christian faith, because that to me is the antithesis of being a person of faith, right? That our faith should guide us to live for others. And so I'm just disappointed, honestly.
mhm,
When you listen to a lot of people coming out of this, them speaking about their pockets, and I mean, if I could grab people who kept mentioning a stimulus check, I'm like, you cannot be selling your vote for $1,200. It just doesn't make sense to me. And then, again, it's not me pushing one or the other party. I'm just like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And I get it, times are hard and we're all struggling, but it is a collective thing, right? Even the struggle is collective. And so my search for a solution cannot be just a solution for self.
Yeah.
Because if I'm thriving and everyone else around me is struggling, I'm now a target. So I should really be invested in the life and livelihood of all people around me, that my entire community thrives. And so for me, that's where I am, is that I'm just really disappointed in the fact that people are very self-centered in their approach, and it's seen in how they vote, one way or the other. Um, and just hopeful that on the other side of this, crazy enough to hope a little bit that maybe something radical can happen that will cause this next 4 years to not be as it was in 2016 to 2020. Um, but even more hopeful that we would have learned and loved lessons now, that we change course for the next cycle.
Yeah. You actually answered my next question. Nessie, I want to hear from you as well as where you are. But I was going to ask, like, what, and thinking about the future, what are some of the values or principles that you believe our communities could hold on to in terms of reimagining a brighter day ahead, brighter days ahead? And kindness is just what stuck out to me and what you said, like practicing kindness um goes a long way and it's free. How about that? It's free. Okay, cost you nothing.
Ish.
Nothing how
Just
free-ish.
free-ish. Because, and I say free-ish because there's a measure of it sometimes that's going to cost us
Mhm.
our own interest, right? And
Yeah.
so sometimes being kind to others means that we sacrifice our own interest, and that's okay because it will balance out as other people are blessed by our kindness, then it returns.
Mhm.
So free-ish. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of what Camille said. There's definitely a range of different emotions that I've felt since, before, during, after, but I think really empathy and understanding is at the forefront of that. I think, wherever you stand, however you voted, we're going to have to have some conversations and get to really understand why this happened. At the end of the day, I don't believe, for the most part, that we want this ununited society. Like, we want to come together. I think a lot of people are unfriending different people, and we're creating all sorts of divisions, right? Even if we believe the same thing about a lot of issues. And I think, we can't live like that. We're going to have to come together. We're going to have to be hopeful, right? If we are not, right, if we give up, that's not the answer. There has to be hope, right? There has to be a choice to move forward, because it's gonna, one way or the other, it's gonna happen. And we don't really know what's to come, right? We don't know. But we do know that this is something we're gonna have to address again in 4 years.
Yeah.
Really for myself, next year, right? Because local elections are just as important.
Right.
And we can't keep doing this every 4 years, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
we all jump in 4 years later and then, wonder, how did we get here? And so, a lot of understanding and a lot of movement for next year, right? And hope. I guess, like, I'll agree with that. Like, just hope that it's gonna turn out.
Can I
Yeah.
Yeah.
add something else to that though, as well? Just because of what Nasi just said in terms of the importance of our local elections. I think one of the things that we did not discuss that's missing and that is unfortunately becoming much more rare is proper education on just basic civics.
So
Just
so
you know,
now We could have a part two. It's up to you. I invite some other people. We have a conversation because it's still November, right? We have to get to January 20th. Um, and thank you for
MLK's
bringing that.
birthday.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up, Camille, because there are a lot of moving pieces currently happening in regards to the Supreme Court. I'm glad Sonia Sotomayor is standing 10 toes down in her position because they were currently trying to convince her to shift out of her seat. I have my reasons for why I think she should stay, but
I
all
disagree.
of the say that again.
I disagree.
But but I'm gonna tell you, we'll talk offline. But I wanna say that like this is the stuff that we like is glossed over a
Mhm.
lot of the time on social media that people don't really pay attention to, and then they want to know like why they're experiencing certain things in their day-to-day lives, that these decisions happened with people they were not paying attention to, didn't vote for a judge, a Supreme Court judge, a senator, a congressperson, assemblyman, a judicial
The
delegate,
Southerners.
councilman. You didn't vote for any of those people, and they are the people that speak on your behalf for your district, for your community, for your city, your town, your state, your county. So it is very much important. And Nasia, thank you for your service because whether it feels like it or not, Donald Trump is a public servant. maybe one day, maybe one day in the coming years it'll feel like that, but he is a public servant, and so people should feel empowered to hold their public servants accountable to what they say they will do and what they represent. Um, I think we have covered a lot. We have covered a lot, and I appreciate those of you who have been watching from the top of our discussion. The reason I went back to 2016 is because what happened in this election didn't start with this election. This is something that I admonish everyone to, as Camille said, understand about civic engagement and where we are as a country, where we are as a culture. America is a melting pot in many ways of different cultures, ethnicities, and Camille named earlier on about the rhetoric that was happening around whether Kamala was black or South Asian or what have you, and it is something that I didn't necessarily take personally, but in conversation with people, I realized how much people are do not know each other, right? That we say we know people for years, and as someone whose father is Cuban, whose mother is Guyanese, like I'm biracial, right? But I can't go in any room and tell someone I'm not black, right? There's nowhere I can go and tell someone I'm not black. But if I was a different complexion, I said I was black, people.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a very tricky and nuanced conversation in America.
Mm.
And I want us to grow beyond a place where we even care and we're looking inside to each other to determine moral compass, um, history and pattern, intentionality. I don't know what to expect, but I thank you both for joining this conversation and being vulnerable in this way about your perspectives, your beliefs, and the way in which you support your community. Before we go, is there anything that you would like to share with everyone about how they can continue to live a more empathetic and compassionate and supportive life given our new president elect and friends?
and friend.
And friends.
On the three-way phone calls, friend.
And friends.
Uh, um, I would say to everyone that we always remember that every topic is attached to personhood, right? Um, and so we should approach all conversations understanding that to you it may just be a topic, but for somebody else it's their life or it's their identity. It's what they're grounded in, and so we should approach all things with grace. Um, and that disagreements are healthy, disagreements are necessary. There's a passage in the Bible that speaks of iron sharpening iron, right? Like disagreements are good. It helps you to be better. Um, but we should always disagree from a place, and hopefully a place of understanding that the other person wants better for all. We don't do that ignorantly though, right? We There are groups of people who do not, they just don't care for others. They care only about not just themselves, but they care only about people who look like them, who think like they do, who who identify as they identify and believe that they should be the only ones that get to make decisions and the only ones that get to thrive. And in those cases, go back to the Bible again. Paul told Timothy, just don't get caught up in unnecessary arguments. Like, just, it makes no sense to enter into arguments that are unwinnable. They just aren't. And the best way to win people is just by the way you live. And as our forever First Lady said, when they go low, we go high.
Amen.
Yes, one of the principles of I am perspective is you have to be open to other perspectives. And if you're not, then you don't deserve to even be in this space, right? And I think, you know, we just have to have more understanding. But also safeguarding yourself and having these conversations with people who want to have these conversations, right? There are many people out there that are willing, that know that there's something to talk about, right? And picking and choosing your battles because, if you want to change the mind of someone who is not willing, it's never going to happen. You're only really harming yourself in that. And so finding those spaces, right? And finding those people in your life, because there are people in your life that you have varying perspectives with. And there's some conversations you may need to have. And you had also have to go in there with an open mind. Like maybe there was a way that I was viewing something that this person is seeing differently. Like you said, Camille, for some people, it might just be a single handed issue. And for other people, it's a whole identity. And so recognizing that.
Amen. I love this because a lot of people need support headed to their holiday functions with family and friends. I've heard the anxiety and rising amongst some of my friends and colleagues, and I am just praying that everyone is grounding themselves in their values and beliefs that they hold themselves accountable to, and allowing others to experience what they're experiencing. Like we all get to feel and experience this moment. And we should all do so responsibly and respectfully. I thank you, ladies, so much for joining me. This has been a lovely conversation. It's probably one of the softest, calmest, sweetest election conversations I've ever had. And so I thank you for contributing to that. Please, either of you go first, second, and letting everyone know where they can learn more about you, your projects, your organizations.
So you can check out some of my previous work on our website, www.iamperspective.com. can also follow us on Instagram at i.amperspective. And we are actually hosting an empath hour tomorrow, virtually. That's from 8 to 9. And I don't know if there's a way of sharing the details, but you can go on our page and find that information. And it's really a space for people to come together who want to talk and who, we are feeling things, and a lot of things that we're feeling, a lot of us are feeling. And so there is, community in that. And so, join us for that conversation. If there's other conversations that you're looking to have, we're definitely open to coming in and supporting with that.
Awesome.
That sounds so cool. Empath Hour.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I will share that info with you as
share.
well. Yeah.
Really cool. Um, I don't really have much for people to follow and log on to, so you can just find me on socials. Cami Speaks, at Cami Speaks, just CAMI, and then Speaks all together. My link tree is on there, so you'll find my website and some of my old things. Haven't really done much because school and churching. Um, and hopefully, eventually, when I'm done with all this research, then I get to put it out in the world, and it helps us all consider others much better.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. I know people have been in and out of the conversation. Lynn, I don't know if you're still here, but thank you for joining. Exciting to see you here. We will be back next week, or I will be back next week with another guest. We'll be discussing how to move forward and prepare for 2025. And I know a lot of people are thinking about that now, based on our political season. But as some of you may know, I always prepare for my next year in around October, November. And so we'll have that conversation happening next week, same time, same place. Thank you for taking time to reimagine with me. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, we're good. Oh my God, so good.